Greetings, everybody, and welcome to episode 16 of Busy Playing Something. I am your host for this evening, Joshua LaRosa, joined by He Only Plays Everything, Sean Harron. I was trying to think of something on the fly, but nothing came to me.
No, that's okay. You got pretty close. It only plays everything. That's pretty fair.
Do you want that as your intro? I feel like, it's been a legacy thing that I've said from the start, but is there a more accurate one, or are you happy with He Plays Everything? Which
I don't mind, really. Like, I guess it doesn't really matter. It's still true. It still rings true. I do play basically everything. I think except for I think we've spoken previously about like horror genre, which I will eventually get to that. I'm only starting to go through like the Alien series, so I've finally seen Alien and Aliens recently. So I'm about to move on to Alien 3, etc. So I'm trying to get into horror stuff, but otherwise, games-wise, I basically play everything.
Yeah, and I'll be open and honest. I stole that used to be, it actually originated, it was a PS3 tagline, right? It only did everything. But then it was actually used in a podcast that I used to listen to called Podcast Beyond from IGN. But this is going back like 10 years. Like, it's not even being... I use it now because it hasn't been used in 10 years. But it was actually Colin's, I guess, moniker. He only played everything. But, I felt that since that podcast is 10 years removed, we would bring it here back for sure. So if you do think of anything, or anyone in the comments can think of anything different, it probably would be good if we had something for our own. But that's my pre-ramble. But for those who don't know, Busy Playing Something is somewhat of a video game podcast, available every second Thursday at 9 a.m. Australian Standard Times here on YouTube. You can find us on audio feeds, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and the like. You can find us on Twitter as well. So hit us up at busy_playing or at Joshua LaRosa or at Holly DePrawn if you want to reach out individually. You can find us doing all sorts of crazy things like debating with people. Well, that's mostly me debating with people. But are you active on Twitter often, or X?
Formerly known as Twitter. I am active. Like, I do read a lot of stuff on it. And I find that it has become very much a politicized platform at the moment. So it's, I'm very 50-50 in my use. But I found that I don't really post a lot on social media anyway, even if it's like, whether it's your Facebook, your Instagram, or anything like that. I don't really post a lot, but I'm trying to. That's kind of like my my early New Year's resolution is to post a little bit more and kind of share a little bit more in my life. I know.
Talking about
Tell
that
me about
already.
it. Yeah, I know.
I can't believe we're talking New Year's resolution in November, but each of their own. I do and I don't. Like, I use Twitter mostly as a news feed, but I gotta admit, like, I've noticed recently the amount of ads and everything that I'm getting, like, it's becoming more and more obnoxious to use it as a news feed. It was a lot cleaner and simpler back in the day before old mate Elon took over. But,
you just got to get premium, man. You just got to buy premium.
I'm sick of subscribing to stuff. I'm not much of a subscriber to things, as you can imagine. And I can't. YouTube Premium I did have, and I do miss, because I can't be sitting there watching ads when I'm on YouTube. Considering that's how I basically watch TV, I can't do the ads. And like, we've got Amazon Prime, and we still get ads there. And like, I'm just sick of the ads. You know what I mean? Like, just enough.
Well, I think I saw some statistics. Like, in general, I think we're shown it was something like it was a couple of thousand ads a day we are exposed to, whether through social media or like even just out and about walking around, and whether it's billboards or signs or stickers or on the back of a book or something like that, there'll be an advertisement for a brand. Like, we see a couple of thousand ads a day.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And that's coming from someone that has a degree in advertising. Which I ultimately didn't pursue. But we are somewhat of a video game podcast. Got plenty to talk about today. Phil Spencer went and did the rounds on numerous different media outlets, had plenty to say. A new campaign launch that we'll get into as well. But we're going to start with the bottom, Sean. I think this might be a good way to just ease into the video game talk because, man, a lot of Xbox news. Thank God for Xbox, hey? If we didn't have Xbox, it'd be nothing to talk about.
A quiet week, huh?
Be a quiet week. So we're going to start with the Jeff Keighley The Game Awards, which, for those who don't know, Jeff hosts the annual Game Awards each year in December. Tomorrow morning, as time of recording, the announcement of the nominees for Game of the Year and other categories are set to be announced. So we thought, given we're here at the Red Line, and that's a preempted for something that we're going to talk about later, since we're here, we're going to actually talk about who we think. So these aren't necessarily our personal picks, but these are the 6 games that we're going to predict will be nominated for the Game of the Year. Now, before we even go into that, Jeff announced over the last day or so a change to some of the rules that sit behind the nominations. The one in particular is the change to the nominees, and now moving forward, remakes, DLCs, remasters, and expansions are now eligible across all categories. Let's stop there. What is your, as I pull some random hair off my microphone, what are your thoughts on that as a whole?
Why? I get it. I get that they're trying to, like, for example, I think one of the DLCs that really spoke to me that I previously played was, if you remember, BioShock Infinite had a couple of DLCs. I think it was like Beneath the Sea or something like that.
Yeah, I was going to say it's something Burial at Sea.
Burial at Sea. That's
Jesus, I haven't thought of that in a
while.
while.
Is it right? But they were expansions and extra DLC to the game, like story wise. But it was very different. And I feel like, if you want to kind of recognize these different expansions or remasters or something like that, I understand kind of where they're coming from. However, I'm very much a purist in that sense, where if we've had Final Fantasy VII and now you're giving Final Fantasy VII like remake, well, how different of a game does it need to be before it can be, it's like basically standing on its own? And I know we had this conversation when the game came out about, Game of the Year nominees and, whether or not we would accept it. I'm still of the belief no. But then when we've got something like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which is still a remake, however, it's like a sequel to the initial remake, and so now you're kind of blurring the lines between, is it an original game or is it actually, a remake? So it's like, I don't like it, but I know where they're coming from, in a sense. Are you kind of on the same page, in a sense, for where you are?
Yeah, look, I don't have an issue with them forming part of the nominees, but I just don't think, for Game of the Year particular, I just find it, I don't know, a bit of a sticking point.
DLC of the year.
Yeah, like, why don't we have expansion? Like, just like how we have best ongoing game, and then that's more like your Fortnights, your live services. Why not have, recognizing best expansions to existing games, right? And then games like Cyberpunk would be a great example with their expansion that launched.
Phantom
Liberty. This is kind of giving away, I guess, one of the nominees, I would say, with Shadow of the Erdtree and Elden Ring. I've got a feeling that if expansions are allowed to be eligible for Game of the Year, I am going to think that perhaps Elden Ring is going to be nominated yet again. And for those who don't know, Elden Ring won Game of the Year in 2023. So, 2022. My God, has it been that long? 2022.
Yeah, it's been 2 years.
Yeah. So that's where I think this is all heading. Do I think that remakes, remasters, DLCs, and expansions should be nominated for Game of the Year in particular? I think no for remasters. Remakes, that's where it gets a bit blurry. If it's a one-to-one remake of like a modern-ish game, I tend to think no. Like say Uncharted, the original Uncharted got remade, right? But it's or even like take Last of Us Part 1. Perfect example, right? Still the bones of the existing game, it just looks very modern. I don't think that should be nominated because that was Game of the Year, nominated 2013, right? When the game originally released. But if it's a Final Fantasy VII remake, or even like, say, Silent Hill 2, which perhaps is another nominee, or in amongst other nominees, where it's taking a game that's fundamentally the same game, but expands on it to a point where it's like, you know how we can. This is probably a clean way of making the rule. If the runtime of the game is exactly the same, that's telling me that it shouldn't be part of the nominees. And what I mean by that is Dead Space remake, right? It's the same. Okay, that's probably not a great example because they did make some slight changes, but you get my thought process, right? If the game is fundamentally the same game, then I think it shouldn't be nominated for Game of the Year. If it's a remake or a retelling that takes a 20-hour game and makes it a 50-hour game and it's mostly new content at that point, then I think yes. Where it gets to expansions and DLC, it's just iffy, right? Because Game of the Year is supposed to represent, the game of the year that had the biggest impact. And perhaps that is a mobile game, and perhaps it is an indie game, like It Takes Two, or maybe it is an expansion to a game. I don't know. I just think it's a bit messy, right? The way that we have our nominees and nominations doesn't make sense anyway. Like Sifu being best fighting game, just doesn't make sense. But anyway, that's my thoughts. Anything else you want to elaborate on further on it? Yeah.
Do you think that with like whether it's remasters or remakes, do you almost think we're kind of, if we're allowing them to have a nomination for Game of the Year, we're just basically allowing this double dipping of like a singular title, and we're kind of reinforcing the fact that if you go back to the well of the games that are already established, whether like, and I'm talking games, not game series, but games that are already established, and then we're bringing them up 5-10 years later. It's a different experience, but it's basically the same. Like, why are we rewarding that over something that's brand new?
I agree 100%. It's like Last of Us Remake Part 1. Technically, it probably was the best game released that year, but we've done this before. So I tend to agree with you. Again, having their own categories, best remake. We get that many remakes. Like, I could think of, just this year alone, we had Silent Hill, we had Final Fantasy VII, we had the Pixel remasters. I guess they launched earlier, but they came physically. We had Dragon Quest just launched. Like, we're getting enough remakes and remasters now that they can have their own category, just like expansions and DLC could. I think that's what I would do. Now that I think about it, I think I wouldn't allow any of these in Game of the Year, but have categories that they could be represented in. And maybe they do cross over too. Like, say, I don't know, maybe Shadow of the Erdtree may get nominated for Best RPG, right? Because it was a big expansion that was nearly a standalone game. But then it's like, so we're kind of nominating a game that you had to basically finish the base Elden Ring. And even then you had to do like certain side things to access. It's not something you can just buy and play. It gets really messy.
I think you've already answered your own question. It's not a standalone game.
Yeah.
So how can it be Game of the Year?
Yeah, exactly. That's it. It's in the name, right?
That's it. Like, if it was a standalone expansion, you did not need to play the original base game, and you can get stuck into it.
Miles Morales.
Its own. Yeah, Miles Morales. It is its own game. Therefore, 100% you can be nominated. Doesn't matter if it's kind of like semi-storytelling or how we were talking about like the 0.5s or whatever, like of games that PlayStation could release. Like, yes, you could see it as that. However, Miles Morales was its own game. That can be a Game of the Year nominee.
Yeah.
But, the Spider-Man, the original Marvel Spider-Man, like the DLC packs, you couldn't put them as Game of the Year because you still need to have the original game, first off. And odds are you're going to have to play through it to an extent to be able to unlock the abilities and the equipment before you actually get stuck into the DLC. Otherwise, you're going back hand tied behind your back.
And before we even get into our 6, or I guess there's technically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 games that we think will be nominated, it's important to look at the history as well, right? Like if you go back to, let's go back to 2019. Yeah, 2019. We had Final Fantasy VII Remake nominated for Game of the Year, right? Sorry, 2020. Which again, it's kind of in its class of its own because remake's really just a play on words. But even if we jump to 2019, Resident Evil 2. Even last year we had Resident Evil 4 remake, right? So we've already set the precedent of remakes being eligible. This is kind of just expanding that further. And to what degree, we don't know, right? Like, this could just mean, again, they just appear in other categories. But I think this will lead us straight into our 6 games. I think this is telling me that Shadow the Erdtree, yet again, for Elden Ring, will be nominated this year as one of the 6 games. What are
I
your...
agree.
We
No,
agree.
I agree. I think 100% this is like they're setting the standards. They're setting the bar early because there is this expectation that it will be nominated. I almost think it will win purely because of the change as well. I look good on them, good on the team, good on the game,
I loved it.
etc.
Yeah.
However, like as I was saying earlier, why are we rewarding going back to the well as a game of the year for an expansion to a game of the year that happened 2 years ago?
Yeah.
Like what we get? So what we get another expansion in 2 years' time, and that goes game of the year as well. So Elden Ring technically wins game of the year 3 years over 6 years. Like that, like to me, if that was to happen, you'd be thinking, well, hang on a second. Like, was there just no other good games
nothing
being
else.
released at the same time? Was it just Jeff Keighley's love child? We don't know.
He just wants the Bill Clinton kid to run back up on stage. Yeah, and I mean, Shadow the Erdtree, like, just to put a pin on it, is probably a worthy nominee. Like, it was basically a standalone experience. But I think I agree with you fundamentally with the idea that we shouldn't be giving, games that previously launched time to shine when there has been so many great games. In fact, I think this year's, for me personally, had more games that I enjoyed than last year, right? And 2023 is touted as one of the best years in a long time. But anyway, so Shadow the Erdtree is the one we both agree. Number 2, where's your mind take you for spot number 2?
See, I think Astrobot.
I agree as well.
I think like it's one of those platformers that has been able to, I think through community has been able to transcend above just like the family genre. Because that's what a lot of these platforms are kind of built into. Like, remember Super Lucky's Tale a few years back? Very solid platforming game. I finished it, but game of the year, not quite. At least you've got the nostalgia as part of it. You've got the platforming. You've got the skill. You've got the difficulty curve. I think there's a lot of things going for Astrobot as a game that you would have it as part of a nominated for Game of the Year.
Yeah, it was critically loved. The gaming press loved it. It's a celebration of PlayStation's history, past, present, and future. And I think I heard someone say, like, it's kind of a bit of a celebration of, like, video games in general, right? Like, kind of taking it back. We don't get these games often. 3D platforms to begin with, but like a quote-unquote AAA platformer we don't see. Astrobot is, like, for me, in my top 5, my personal top 5. I'm probably giving away some of my answers here, but I do think that the industry will want to recognize it as one of the best games of the year. So I agree. I think number 2 would go to Astrobot. Number 3 for me, so far we've agreed on 2. I think we'll probably agree with the full list here. I think, if anything, there's probably games that are going to be missed on here that perhaps should have been nominated. Yeah. But I think Rebirth Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2 is in the running, I would say, for Game of the Year this year. Obviously, it launched so early in February, so there is that recency bias that we often hear and see about with games that launch October, November, December, or October, November, being in the mindset of gamers that are the ones that often win. But I think Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a special game, a big step change to Remake in terms of taking the fundamentals of a game and then really expanding it. Like, you don't often see that happen, right? People forget Remake was not an open world game at all. So to take a game that's linear in nature, which is by design, right? Because Midgard is supposed to feel claustrophobic. The whole point of that is to feel like you're, in a town or in a city.
Yeah.
But to take that and then expand that out in record time, I would say, in 3-4 years. Plus the story is just fantastic. Yeah, what were you going to say? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, no, that's all right. Like, I agree. I think Rebirth is there, and like early on if you play Final Fantasy VII, the original one, like even I know the first like act sort of thing, it is very linear, and that's what the first game was, and then it kind of opens up a little bit once you leave Midgar. Well, once you leave the city, that's kind of where Rebirth goes towards. So I do agree. I think, yeah, Rebirth will be one of those nominated games. However, I think that there is another one that might, you know, pip it in like the RPG sense, which I think you are currently playing at the moment.
Metaphor Refantasio by Atlas. Yeah, I think this is
Yes.
I definitely agree with this, and I've actually just ticked over 50 hours in this game. My first, I think, Atlas game that I'm going to finish, and I've got to say, I absolutely adore this game. I think that it's so funny, like the themes and the themes that this game tackles is so deep, and sometimes it can get, I guess, blurred by some of the anime-esque, I guess, characters and things like that. Like, it has got that layer of anime, which I like. But the more I sit and think about it, Metaphor is a special game. And I definitely think, yeah, I agree, will be nominated for Game of the Year. So I hope this is one you can pick up and play at some point.
We're 4 for 4 at the moment. By the way, for those of you watching and listening at home, we don't have a list of games in front of us.
No, we're just going off.
That we put this beforehand, like where we can see what each other has done. We have not done that planning for this. We are purely going off what we've got ourselves.
Exactly. And I guess it's because we have great, we got a finger on the pulse when it comes to the industry, right? That's why you come to this podcast.
That's why.
For actual understanding of how things work. So 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth slot. Now, before you go into it, I do want to make the caveat of, not even a caveat, just something to point out. We are missing our token Nintendo game and our indie random game.
Yep.
Which that doesn't always happen.
Down, by the way, I have 2 put down.
Okay, because like games like Stray were nominated in 2022, and I'm not saying that this happens like, all right, we need to have a Nintendo game, we need a Sony game. Like, it's not, but it's a funny joke that often pops up. For me, I actually don't have games kind of in that space, but I can see one potentially being there. But let's go. What's your 5th nominee?
So the indie game, I think the token indie title, I think will be Balatro.
Yes, I was torn between Balatro or Animal Well being...
Yeah, I looked at Animal Well, but I think Balatro, and now that it's on mobile as well, I think... Which... Does okay, for those of you who don't know, it's basically it's a systemic card game with like narrative elements. So think... It's a bad example, but think Inscription in a sense, where it's card game based, but there's story behind it. Basically, I don't want to like go too much into it, but yes, that was my pick for indie game. You went Animal Well, did you?
No, I had Balatro in my mind, but I think it will be between, like, if it's going to be any 2 indie games, it's going to be out of them. I'm happy to say Balatro. And maybe Animal Well just, wins best indie game or something like that.
Well, Animal Well was done by the team, which was, I think, Big Mode by Video Game Donkey.
Yes, yeah, he published it. I think it was made by one person too. So, yeah, Balatro. Let's put it there. All right, in our imaginary list that I'm just totally typing on the go. And I'm just gonna write Blut. Yeah. Now, right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 6th spot. This is where it gets for me really difficult, because I think there are games that I think should be nominated that I don't. Right. All right, I'm just gonna say the 2 that come to mind very quickly: Black Myth Wukong.
Yep.
Helldivers 2.
Yep, they are literally the 2 that I have written here.
Now, obviously, they both can't be nominated if they're gonna stick to the 6 nominees. So, in saying that, like, again, this is not my personal list, because if I was going through my rules, like, Shadow of the Erd Tree wouldn't be nominated, and I probably would have Black Myth and Helldivers.
We'll do ours in a later show.
Where do we go? Now, there has been talk, I don't know how, again, this is all just tinfoil hat theory, that obviously there was a bit of drama behind Black Myth Wukong with the way it launched, on the platforms it launched on, some of the things potentially said by the studio, and maybe it was a translation error, maybe it was not. So there is some drama around that game. That if these games are being selected by media, that perhaps Helldivers 2 would be more favorable.
But even Helldivers 2 had their media issues as well, basically in Discords and stuff, and the creators basically saying if you don't like it, don't play the game, sort of thing. But they didn't say it as succinctly and as nicely as that.
Yeah.
But also, multiplayer games don't really get nominated, except for maybe Overwatch all those years ago.
That is true too. I just think Helldivers is like, you think about the year, and Helldivers, like, it's Sony's most successful new IP ever, and took the industry by storm for a long time. We forget how quickly this year's moved. Months. Which is a big deal for a game that the first one was a Vita game that was on PS4 that maybe 500,000 people played, right? Like, it wasn't, or maybe 1 million people played. Given this list and the one spot, I think Helldivers is going to get it in terms of the nominee.
Yeah, see, I've got 4 games that I had lined up for this last spot. So the Nintendo one was Echoes of Wisdom.
I hope not.
I don't think it's going to get there. No. So but I had my Nintendo game there just in case. The other 3 that I had, we've already spoken about Black Myth. We've already spoken about Helldivers 2. No. Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2.
Yeah, and
recency bias, purely because of recency bias.
I think that game, I played it, right? Like, it is solid. I don't think it's anywhere near on the caliber of, like, say, a Black Myth or even a Helldivers 2 in terms of even player base.
I still think recency bias. Like, I don't think recency bias is in like a Dragon Age Veilguard getting nominated.
No,
although that's such a comfort game to nominate. It's such an easy one. I don't think that's going to happen. Knowing Keeley, I reckon Helldivers 2 will probably get it because there'll be outrage.
I think it has to. Like, I think it's just one of those things because it launched so early in the year. It has to be nominated because everybody was talking Helldivers.
It's the impact that it had.
Yeah. So this is, again, just as we wrap up, not our personal picks. We'll actually have a episode dedicated, our last show of the year in December. We'll go through our personal picks. We may be joined by a few special guests as well. So just to go over the list one more time again, this is what we're predicting will be announced tomorrow morning. Shadow the Erdtree, Astrobot, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Metaphor ReFantazio, Balatro, and Helldivers 2 being the 6 nominees.
That's a solid 6.
It's a solid 6. As I said, this year for me was like a better year than last year. Like, there is so many games that in any other year I think could be nominated. Like, I think Silent Hill 2 could have been nominated. I think Black Myth Wukong probably should be nominated. There's just games upon games.
2, Like a Dragon, Infinite Wealth.
Exactly. The list goes on and on.
It's getting Satisfactory.
Yeah. I mean, in any other, like, okay even-ish years, like a game like Stellar Blade may even be nominated, right? Like, there's this year was like jam-packed with some really cool releases. So we'll see in the morning. What I'll do is, if you follow us at Twitter, busy_playing, we'll post this list after this show, and we'll see where we land 3 a.m. tomorrow. I'll be checking it in the morning when I wake up, not at 3 a.m.
You'll be checking? Good, because I'm not staying up late.
No, not for an announcement of some names. Okay, so, topic of the show. Big one, as we stretched our legs, now we're starting to, now that we're getting older, we're stretching out our back, our spine, the rest of it, and, you're going to want to stretch for this one, because we've got a lot to talk about. Buckle in. You ready?
Thanks, Phil Spencer.
No worries. Thanks, Phil. So, Phil Spencer made news this week after an interview spree at outlets including Rolling Stones and Bloomberg to discuss what's next for Microsoft and the Xbox brand. From new handheld hardware to acquisitions to exclusivity plans and more, there's a lot to discuss. So, firstly, we're going to jump to Forbes. In a new interview with Bloomberg, Spencer made new... okay, so what we're going to do, I'm going to read through this whole thing because there's a lot of different things we can talk about. We'll read through the whole thing, and then we'll pick it and play wherever we want.
Sit back and relax then.
Yeah. In a new interview with Bloomberg, Spencer made news making a pretty plain declaration about Xbox plans for exclusive games. Quote, "I do not see a sort of red line in our portfolio that say, thou must not," Spencer said. Also saying that it's too early to make any decisions on the next Halo game. If there ever was going to be a red line, it certainly felt like Halo would be it. I suppose Spencer is not saying that all games will come over to other platforms, but nothing is off the table. It further compounds the current situation where some games and not others are on different platforms. Some are timed exclusives, some are not exclusives, and so on. Now we're going to jump to GameSpot. Speaking to Bloomberg on Xbox's plan for handheld, Spencer said that the expectation is that we would do something in that area. Bloomberg reported that Microsoft is currently working on prototypes and thinking about the best way forward. The site also reported that Spencer said any potential Xbox handhelds will be, quote, a few years out. For now, Microsoft designers and engineers are spending time updating the Xbox mobile app to offer a better experience on portable gaming devices that already exist. But on a longer horizon, Spencer said, quote, "I think our team could do some real innovative work there," end quote. This was all to coincide with Xbox's new marketing campaign, "This is an Xbox." Now we're going to jump to IGN. This week, Microsoft launched a new advertising campaign designed to hammer home the fact that you can play an Xbox pretty much on any device and anywhere, sparking yet more backlash at the company's console strategy. The, quote, "This is an Xbox" campaign includes images of cats and bento boxes amongst other devices that play video games. The idea Microsoft is trying to get across is, which is keeping with their previous message, is that Xbox is less about a console these days and more about being able to play on any device capable of playing video games. So in this sense, a TV is an Xbox, a phone is an Xbox, so on. And that hasn't gone down well with core Xbox fans already dissatisfied with Microsoft's gaming strategy in recent years. Not only have they seen the Xbox fade from importance as sales of the Xbox Series X and S collapse. One more jump. In an interview with Rolling Stone's, Xbox CEO Phil Spencer discussed the future of the Xbox brand. I'm reading the same thing again. In that same interview with the Rolling Stones, Spencer spoke about the introduction of where we go? Acquisition. Sorry. Now we're going to jump to Windows Central. There's a lot of jumping around. I think I might have copied the content on here twice. Finally, let me start again. Now jumping to Windows Central. Microsoft Gaming CEO Phil Spencer spoke with Bloomberg regarding the Xbox business, sharing details on a number of topics. Now, to be clear, Bloomberg has their article behind a paywall, hence why I've had to jump around to multiple different sites to get all the information. Spencer said that they're keeping an eye out on video game acquisitions that can, quote, add to what we're already trying to do, but there is nothing imminent to expect. Spencer also noted in order to further Microsoft's gaming reach, Xbox will continue to partner with teams in China. All right. So, again, we've covered a lot of things. We've covered...
Yeah, what were the topics again?
So, the discussion points. Microsoft stands with no red lines on games coming to other platforms. Handheld hardware, years away. Microsoft's comments, or Phil Spencer's comments on acquisitions. The new advertising campaign. So there's a lot there. But where would you like to start? Where would you like to begin?
I don't know. From the first point.
Let's start with the most obvious one. The thing that seemed to, I guess, perhaps maybe the ad campaign annoyed more people, but for this purpose, we'll start there. The no red line comment. Phil Spencer's comments on games coming to other platforms, stating that they don't have no red line, and quote, they don't have, what was it? Thou shall not appear in other pieces of hardware. Yep. In this particular instance, people are talking about PlayStation. I don't think people are too concerned with Xbox games going over to Nintendo Switch. Where do we want to... Let's start there. What are your thoughts on this? It feels like we've heard this before.
Yeah, we have heard this before because I'm pretty sure they are actively working on getting Halo onto PlayStation. So, like, we already know that that's happening. Rumored potentially to be the Halo remake of the original Halo that they're rumored to be working on. So we already know that that's potentially in the works. At the end of the day, I guess it kind of comes down to, who is it for? And so as a consumer, it's great because you're able to play a game on different platforms. If you don't own an Xbox, you can now play it on PlayStation. Um, I don't think Xbox will be losing sleep nowadays because, as they've already said, they're focusing less on the hardware size and it's more about, yep, any platform will do as long as you play our software. And I'm pretty sure at the moment they get like an 80% cut of sales of Black Ops on PlayStation. PlayStation gets the other 20. I think it's something along those
Yeah,
lines.
industry standard 70-30, but we don't know probably
Yeah,
the
it's 70
yeah.
to 80 to 20 to 30. So regardless of the fact, like
Mm.
and Black Ops has been selling well on PlayStation as we covered last episode.
Yep.
So I think with these sorts of games like your Halo and like even your Starfield, Indiana Jones, that sort of stuff, which we already know, like Indiana Jones is going to be a timed exclusive, Starfield potentially moving across, Halo potentially in the works. I don't see it as a bad thing initially because it's like, yep, as I said, and more people can play the games. However, is this going to strengthen the argument to say, well, Xbox should then not focus on their platforms? They should start going third party like your Sega and that sort of stuff. And it kind of brings out that communication, which I don't think has been properly addressed. But that's probably the next thing that they're going to have to address once they actually start getting some games out.
Yeah, and like for me, like the the red line comment, it just goes with what Phil and Satya Nadella and Tim Cook, what they were all saying for the last year or so, right? we were very quick to say when the 4 games were announced earlier this year that it wasn't just going to be 4 games, and this was part of a shift. I actually found interesting, like with the Phil Spencer's pretty wordy, and picks his words quite well. It's funny, we heard the rumor a few months back I think when the Halo rumors started to swell, that there was the term red line. There was no red line on what games could come across. That was the terminology used in the leak or in the rumor. I do find it, I don't know, coincidental that Phil Spencer's actually using the term there is no red line. To me, this like that kind of validated, not that I needed validation that games were coming, but it's got to be either a massive coincidence or something along the lines of how he's using the same terminology that the leak had. The second point, and this was something I picked up, or I actually heard someone else say on another podcast, is the "thou shall not" quote. Kind of sounds a little biblical, right? Like in the sense of like "thou shall not." Like it's a very interesting term. And the reason why this podcaster was making that comment, I actually thought that was actually an interesting analysis of Phil Spencer's words there, is for many, games like Halo and Gears are so heavily tied to the console that the idea
Untouchables.
that they're kind of like this high and mighty, series that are untouchable. And kind of biblical in that sense that if Halo comes across the PlayStation, this could spell the doom of the Xbox console, right? So the term "thou shall not" kind of says to me
Thou
that,
must not.
or "thou must not," kind of says to me like everything is on the table. And Phil Spencer made this clear, I think, in an interview with Ryan McCaffrey at IGN after the Xbox showcase, when they said Microsoft will be doing more of this. For me, I just think, again, the messaging of all of this is just, and I think partly it is because their strategy is kind of changing on the go, but I don't know how hard it is for them to come out and just say, like, this is what we're doing, this fundamentally is where the industry is going, in a more succinct way, and say that ultimately this will allow Microsoft and Xbox to continue to grow beyond where it will ever go if we don't do anything different, right? Like, I don't know, you hear online, like, I guess hardcore Xbox fans kind of upset the fact that these games are coming over to PlayStation. But that's just fundamentally ignoring the facts. Like, Microsoft was in the red if it wasn't for Activision. So what they were doing previously up until that point, which included having ZeniMax in their portfolio and releasing big games like Starfield and the others, that not doing anything would actually spell doom for the brand. If anything, and I said this at the start, if anything, this move ensures their longevity and their growth. And I actually ultimately think that I had a discussion point in here is, among all the doom and gloom, is Microsoft setting the brand up for long-term success. So I'll expand on a little bit on that, and then I'll be interested to get your thoughts on it. Microsoft, as a software company, is as big as they are because their software is available on everything. Everything's a Windows PC. And sooner or later, everything will be a Xbox. And that will be beyond the point where an Xbox hardware or a piece of hardware will or won't exist. And games are just played on whatever device it needs to be. Now, Microsoft have got they do have a thing for kind of jumping the gun and being first to make big changes, right? Launching games on PC, Game Pass, like they're always first to kind of make the steps that the other two players won't do. So
they take more risks.
They do take more risks, and they're in a position where they can and kind of need to, right? They can from a financial perspective and need to from a fact that they're not catching to Sony. So the best way for them to compete is in the future where there isn't dedicated hardware in the sense of my PlayStation games only play on PlayStation. That's the only place you can play them. Have your games available everywhere, and all of a sudden you become the biggest publisher in the world, and ultimately will have more sway over your competitor than your competitor would ever have on you. Because if you're fundamentally controlling IP and franchises, some of the biggest in the world in Call of Duty and Minecraft and others, you become more important to Sony than some of their own first-party studios are. Because the money that they make off you, you become a valid partner. So, the old, if you can't beat them, join them. But I think this is just spoiled a lot by some of the hardcore fan base. And Phil Spencer actually spoke about that in one of the, in the interview with Rolling Stones, right? He said, some people, quote, long for the simplicity of a single box, a single platform, a single game. He said, by insisting that today's largest games are bigger than any of these individual platforms. We go well beyond this. As soon as games launch, like Destiny, Minecraft, Fortnite, where it's ongoing and those games are available across multiple platforms, it killed the console mentality. Didn't kill consoles. It killed the console mentality of, this is my box, this box only plays this game, and this game can't be then taken to my PC or even the next generation, right? It just simply doesn't happen that way. And I think, in fact, Sony navigating this at a far slower pace, but also need to think about when that day comes, are they prepared? So I know I kind of said a lot there, but do you see that these moves, bringing it back, these moves to launch games across multiple platforms is setting the brand up for long-term success?
I believe it is, and you have outlined the fact that they're going to have partnerships and that sort of thing. Like they're opening up the potential for that. I think the console argument part, like that's a strong argument, and yet you've got your hardcore who they want to buy an Xbox, they want to have Xbox games on there. There's that prestige where it's only available on Xbox. That was a thing, when Xbox was first launched, they had the little corner saying only on Xbox and on some of the original titles. But nowadays, if you are going to pick up a copy of Call of Duty and you don't have a console, what's the driving point? Right? Like, yeah, okay, if Call of Duty's only on Xbox, sure, you might look at an Xbox. But odds are, if all your friends have PlayStation, well, you'll get a PlayStation.
Exactly.
It's more about what your friends have. It's about your communities there. You're not buying a console because of the game anymore. You're buying the console because of everything else, and the games are secondary. Nobody's going out and buying Last of Us Part 1, or nobody's going to go out and get an Xbox just to play Indiana Jones.
No.
Nobody's going to do that.
No.
Nobody's going out and buying an Xbox for Halo. They're saying, what else does it have?
you
Like,
hit
and
the
that's where you've got
nail.
to sell Game Pass.
You hit the nail on the head, right? Like Phil Spencer said it during that interview with Kind of Funny. Like Starfield could be 11 out of 10, and it wouldn't make people move from PlayStation. And it's because people are set in their ecosystems. So if software isn't enough to really do anything in terms of bringing people across, we often talk about like people who defend exclusives, and I am one of them. Like I think exclusives do add flavor to a console and kind of differentiate them from the others. A counter argument to that point is just as exclusives played here's the flavor of the console, this is what the console can do. So is Game Pass, right? So Game Pass ultimately is becoming the new exclusive where software is available everywhere. We've spoken about this before. Software is available everywhere. But what does Xbox do that my PlayStation can't? Or when I'm buying the two, what is the difference? Where before it was, PS4 and Xbox One launch, and it's like, all right, do you want Killzone, Shadowfall, Knack, or do you want Dead Rising and whatever they had as launch, right? Forza. Do you want those games? Do you like those games from these studios? Well, this is the console you buy. Remember, we used to have that conversation when we were working in retail. Do you like Halo or do you like Uncharted, right? It was as simple as that. And
that's if you'd already played those games before. You already were established.
Yeah. So it was kind of like, what styles of games do you like? And these studios only work on these games, and these studios are owned by these people. Where now it's like the equivalent of that conversation is, do you want access to a subscription service where you pay X amount per month and get access to all these games? Well, then Xbox is the way to go. And if that is the fact, I've never heard of a subscription service. It's like, imagine if Netflix restricted you to buying a certain TV to get access to it. It doesn't make sense, right? The whole reason Netflix works is because it's available on my phone, it's available on my iPad, it's available on the TV, regardless of brand. You can't have a subscription service and then also have, you can have exclusive content like, Stranger
You're not selling
Things.
a device to use it.
Yeah. So if you're going to sell a device, the device needs to be accessible and needs to work with other things for it to really make sense for Microsoft. Sony is kind of very different, right? So, the other point that I add in here is like, what's your view on, because I'm conscious I talk a lot, what's your view on, like, I often see online, console sales are stagnating and that the console base isn't growing or is growing very slowly, and that Sony might in fact be in trouble by not doing what Microsoft's doing and preparing for a more open, inclusive ecosystem. So like, what's your view on that being true? Like that consoles aren't it in a bit like they used to be, and are slowing down.
I think it's big. Like, yes, but also we always judge things on growth. Everything has to grow. You have to sell more. Everything's judged on growth. If you break even year on year, they're going to say, well, what's wrong? When at the end of the day, you might be making the same amount of profits, right? But you just made the same amount of profits that you did the year before.
Your revenue's the same, but costs are going up. So you're...
Yeah, well, if your revenue's going up and your costs are going up, and you make the same profit that you did the year before, they're going to say it's a failure. Because in this society that we live in, you have to have more profits year on year. That's the way that cookie crumbles. But in terms of our consoles stagnating, I think yes, but purely to an extent of you can now play these games on so many other platforms. It's not like you have to buy a PS2 to buy PS2 games now. Because nowadays, the games that you want to play, like your Roblox, your Fortnite, that sort of stuff, like general ones that you're coming into, they're available on everything. If you've got a basic laptop, you can probably play Call of Duty. That we're at that stage now where you don't need the hardware to play the software. You just need to find the software and then find a hardware that suits you. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the mindset. It used to be, oh yeah, if you had a lot of money, you get a PC, but now you can get a PC for $700, $800, the same cost as an Xbox or a PS5, and that could run, a whole heap of games. It's just about the extra costs, about the software that you're now focusing on. I think in terms of Xbox, they don't need to focus on their hardware at the moment. Like, yeah, I think the handheld hardware, if that's going to be the plan going forward, yep, totally get it, understand it, because even the Xbox Series X is still more powerful than PlayStation 5 Pro on paper. So they don't have to do the mid kind of generation boost that they've done every other year and PlayStation do every single time. They might do it. They don't have to. They're focusing on the subscription side. They're focusing on the software side. PlayStation, on the other hand, this is a business model that has worked for them since the PlayStation 2. PlayStation 1, yeah, sold a lot and had a Slim and all that sort of stuff. But I think from PlayStation 2, that was kind of the console that, people, at least at our age, were growing up with. And so you've always got your base model, your Slim model, and then like a Pro model. Yes, I think generally sales will stagnate and go down as we move more towards a digital era. Yes, there's still going to be an audience for physical hardware. That's not going to go away. You've still got people buying physical games. People buy bloody trading cards. It's the same sort of thing. But in terms of what the companies might want in terms of hardware sales, they're going to be disappointed. And I don't think PlayStation's, if they do have a plan, I think it's PlayStation 6 generation plan. I don't think it's this generation. This generation, they're all in on hardware.
So all right, in saying that then, so take PS6 and the next.
Yeah.
So it's clear, right? Microsoft's approach is to expand their software portfolio, get into as many places as possible.
Yeah.
That would ultimately, I would say, lead to a next Xbox being more Windows-like than proprietary Xbox hardware, which is we can talk about hardware in a sec. Where do you think that leads Sony, right? Because they're obviously much more, the PlayStation is their most profitable sub-brand under Sony.
They're more nostalgic.
I think. Where do you see... if Sony, if consoles aren't truly stagnating, right, and PS5, although on par with PS4, is likely to sell similar, ultimately, at about 120 to 130 million units, where does Sony find growth? Because like you said, right, their shareholders, just like with any other company, are saying, we want growth. And, maybe moving to PC is part of that. I'll let you answer that in a sec, but how do you see them growing?
I think, yes, moving to PC is part of that, but that's moving software. So that's moving digitally. That's not moving anything physically. So I think that's already established as a way that they're going to earn profit through sales and that sort of thing. And so yeah, the thing with digital software is you don't have a limited amount. There is an infinite amount of copies of a game that you could sell theoretically. They just choose not to for whatever reason.
So hardware, how do they solve for that?
So hardware, I think it actually depends on what else Sony is doing with their other hardware. And I'm not talking about PlayStation. I'm talking about their other hardware, like Sony TVs. How are they doing in sales? Because at what stage do we get to a point where instead of buying your PlayStation 6, you buy the PlayStation TV? You can pick your size. Is it 30 inch, 40 inch, 50 inch, or 60 inch? Because they're still thinking about home, like the home base. They're still thinking about, okay, well, you're in the living room. What's the best way to play? Now, usually you could say, okay, well, VR is starting to come there. Yeah, cool. People don't have the space for VR.
No,
like I moved into my new place, and I would have to move the couch back a little bit to really get enough play space to be able to play Horizon Call of the Mountain.
Yeah, VR ain't it in terms of growing hardware.
Exactly. VR's not it. Mobile, well, they could do mobile, but Sony's had a couple. Sony Ericsson, anybody remember? I'm pretty sure they had a couple of other mobile phones that played games as well. They're not going to go back into that space for PlayStation 5 kind of quality games on a little touchscreen. Probably not.
So you're the head of Sony right now, and I say to you, I want the PS6 to sell more than the PS5 and 4. Yep. What do you do? Sorry, I'm used to answering questions. I feel like I'm a bit of a
That's all right.
It's helping me think of my answer at the same time.
No, it's okay. So, okay, if I was head of Sony or head of PlayStation, and I'm looking at building the PlayStation 6 from the ground up, what am I going to do?
Yeah, okay. I want more sales than PS5.
Right. So I'm going to look at, well, why isn't the PS5 selling the way that it is? Is it software? Early on, we know that it was the amount of units available, thanks pandemic. So, okay, there's a couple of little things there. You might think, all right, what has a company like Nintendo done very well? So they had a console that was handheld and connected to your TV, right? So they were able to kind of cover those both markets. They had the software as well that was established, and it was price point wise easy to get into. Yes, different control scheme and all that sort of stuff. That's fine. I would be looking at where are people playing the games and what is in every single room. Now, for that, if it's more and more people are playing on their PC or connecting it to a computer monitor or something like that, well, I think you've got to go down that path. You've got to have the PlayStation PC or something like that, like kind of going down that path. So it could still be a console you can hook to the TV, but you need to start working together with probably Microsoft to get an operating system that's going to play as a PC, and you're looking at the PlayStation PC in a sense. That's extreme. I think the other way, like, and by the way, this is
we're all shooting off the cuff. Like,
yeah,
you can see me just kind of staring into space because I'm like, I don't think what would I do?
This is also on the assumption that they're not just going to do it the PlayStation 6 console
and do this, and do the same,
do the same thing. Yeah, I'm thinking outside the box here. But I seriously think that if they wanted to be very different and try and get sales, make the best TV you can and call it the PlayStation TV. Because if I've got I got a 60-inch and a 65-inch TV, right? If I could get the PlayStation TV for $1,000, well, that covers my TV and that covers my console, right? You could have different price points for the different size of the TV. All you have to do then is worry about the hardware. Because if you're not going to just have your standard console per generation with the exclusives, and you're going to try something different, and this all comes back to how well is Sony doing in everything else but PlayStation. We've already know PlayStation's the most profitable. Okay, so where are your TVs at? Where's your mobile phones at? Where's all this stuff going? Are you going to stop it? Are you going to continue it? Are you going to strengthen it? Like, Sony has that unique ability to look at all the different hardware outlets that they have and say, what's working? What combination can we do? With Microsoft, it's a case of, okay, well, you've got your Windows operating system. Well, we can have a Game Pass app on there. Perfect. And we can have it on every single Windows operating system. Like, they have that software, but that software, hardware, they don't care. As long as it can run Windows, it can run Game Pass. So they're looking at the software side of it. I think Sony, they're mostly hardware.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think
hardware.
Microsoft are probably not looking at next generation saying, all right, we want the next Xbox to be the best-selling console ever.
They're in the next generation already.
Yeah, they're all about, we want to have the most software on the most, the best software across more platforms than ever, making the most money, and having games meet the players on where they want to play. We know that, right? I guess for me, if I was, Sony's in a more interesting position where they can afford to kind of just wait and see where things land. But there is the fact that, like, console sales as a whole haven't really changed much since the PS2 generation, right? We always kind of get 250 million units across the three, and then it's like, PS3 and 360 was about 80 to 90 million kind of split. Sony was about 90, they were about 80. All right, the next generation PS4, 130 versus 40 or 50 for the Xbox. But now Sony's going to get to a point where their PS5 is probably going to land close to PS4. So they're selling comparable. It's not a real big growth like we saw from PS3 to PS4. We're not going to see that again. PS2 is kind of an outlier because it was the DVD player, it was at a good price point, so on and so forth. So what has Sony learnt from PS5? Again, I'm shooting off the cuff, so correct me if I kind of say something wrong here. What have they learnt? They learnt that we could sell a more expensive console and sell it comparably in terms of units sold to a console that was much cheaper. That's an interesting point. 2, I think that and Sony is doing this, there are markets that are untapped by hardware and consoles in particular. China, Korea, India, Africa, big continents of people who play games. And you see the China Hero Project, you see the India Hero Project, you see the Africa Hero Project, you see this, the games coming out of Korea at the moment, Liza P, Stellar Blade, etc. We're seeing markets that are historically PC and mobile now look to also expand to console, just like Microsoft is expanding outwards and Sony's expanding to PC. If all ultimately developers want is to have their games played by the most people. So for them, that market, from the developer's perspective, hasn't really been touched too much by console. It's mostly been PC. So if I'm Sony and I'm like, okay, I need to sell more PS6s, look at what one game did in Black Myth Wukong for PS5 sales in China. It blew them up, right? Sold many, many, many of millions of units just through one game in one market. If you can do that times 2, times 3, do that in Korea, do that in other parts of the world, you are going to see natural hardware growth. In saying that, there is going to come a point where I've long believed this, and maybe this is what Sony also believes, not that I have any understanding of what they believe, but it just seems that maybe this is what they're thinking. Microsoft see the gamer being person that plays Candy Crush and also the person that plays Fable, that also plays dedicated Xbox games on hardware, that also plays on PC. Where for me, I think gaming is a big pie, but I also think there is a clear distinction between two separate categories. A clear distinction of a console gamer versus a PC gamer. You're not getting me to PC regardless of what you do. And you're not getting PC gamers to console regardless of what you do. I think Sony's learnt that because that is why they're ultimately launching games on PC now. The fear when Microsoft did it was, is this going to cannibalize hardware sales? Which it did. So Sony didn't do it for years, for nearly 10 years. But we're in a different place now. And even now they're not doing day and date. It's still stagnated because they're worried that the person who would have purchased the PS5 is now going to play on PC. And then Sony doesn't get a rip. So, again, I'll look into those other markets. Software diversification. Hardware diversification. Look at enhancing the hardware range. I think Portal's a great product. Handheld. Different ways of getting people into the PlayStation ecosystem. Because ultimately, Sony and Microsoft are fighting for people's time. They talk about monthly active users. And I often debated that sales were more important than monthly active users. And I still think that is true unless monthly active users looks at this calculation. How many people are playing, how many people play games a year? Or how many people buy games a year, right? On average. We're the exception, but on the whole, how many people buy games per year? And say that number is on average 3 games a year. And it's because the vast majority of gamers are like Call of Duty, FIFA, and something else. They make up a large piece of that pie. So that's why Call of Duty sells 20 million units every year, and then Astrobot sells 1.5 million. It's because a lot of people are playing those. So if the average person buys 3 or 4 games a year at $70 a pop, if those games are single player, that's all the money that they're getting out of them, unless they buy DLC. If they're multiplayer, do they engage in microtransactions or not? So that's the calculation. When they look at MAU, monthly active users, they look at how much time is being spent on their platform. But then the critical piece of information in that is how much money are they spending when on those platforms. So again, if someone buys, say I only buy 4 games a year, FIFA, Call of Duty, whatever, and say 2 single player games. Those single player games, you're only getting the $70 or the $80 off me. And then the other 2 games, do I buy microtransactions and DLCs and things like that? If I'm looking at monthly active users and I'm playing more than ever, is the likelihood of me spending more money than ever also true? Hey, I'm playing so much of this game. What's a few Fortnite skins here or there? What's this DLC? Whatever, I'll do it. So it's kind of like if you're Sony, you got to kind of look at if this market is going to grow, it will grow in those regions. But even at that point, we will hit a saturation point. So can we find comfort in those 140 million units sold each generation? And can we extract more money from those same users to grow our revenue without expanding console? Because we're not going to get it to 200 million ever. It will probably always stay around that point now. PlayStation's kind of become a household name in the industry, right? So if I'm Sony, I'm going, this is the audience that can play games. You can't just give a controller to someone and expect them to understand how to play it. You can do things to help introduce people to games, but really it's the audience that it is, right? No one's just gonna. My wife's not gonna pick up a controller tomorrow and start playing games because it's not going to happen, regardless of how great the graphics are and what story it's telling. It just won't happen. So, how can I take that audience and extract more money and drive costs down? And this all goes back to what I think Sony is ultimately now trying to do with Hiroki Totoki as Sony's group CFO having a big role to play with PlayStation is this is the audience we need to grow, and we will find markets to grow, but we need to recognize that it won't grow beyond a certain point. Maybe they can forecast based on these countries and how many people play games and if they play on Xbox or PC or whatever. So how do we drive cost development down so we make a better margin on the games we sell? How do we get to PC? How do we get to mobile? How do we make TV shows and movies? But having it all come together is difficult. So they're both taking very different bets. Microsoft's taking, I would say, more the safe bet and saying, okay, our hardware ain't selling as much as we would like. We can probably bank each generation. We're going to have 20 or 30 million units sold. That's kind of where we are now. It is what it is. But if we launch Halo on PlayStation, that is a growth that we would never have seen by pushing Halo exclusively on Xbox. It's a more safe bet, I would dare say. It may hurt the Xbox brand, but I am telling you, it doesn't matter. It does not matter to anyone but people on Twitter that Halo may be on PlayStation. Nobody cares. In fact, most people buy games not knowing who made it. So let's not pretend that isn't the case. And Sony, being as stubborn as they are and more reliant on hardware, need to find other ways to grow that won't hurt the hardware either as quickly or at all.
So I like how my response to the question is
get a TV with PlayStation.
do something fucking weird. Like just go out of the box, change what you're doing, and your answer is, "I'll just sell it in more places, bro." Just sell it in more places. Sales, but it's. I wish it was as small. They probably wish it was as simple as that. But you're entering markets that historically consoles were banned in China up until 2020, right? Like it's not. Yeah. It's risky. But they would see the data, right? Like they look at Genshin Impact, and again, the money from Genshin Impact that's played on PlayStation goes through to Sony first, and then paid to Miihoverse, right? I just assume that PlayStation 5s will be selling in in China and South Korea, like in these markets, like that's happening now.
That is, yeah. But
yeah, exactly.
They're traditionally.
What would you do PS6 then?
Well, they're traditionally not they're not console markets, so it's like. They're hardcore gamers in the sense that they're on PC, but there isn't historically been a big presence there. Like whenever
they're starting that now, though, right?
They're starting that now on the basis that the developers are starting games that are on that caliber. Like you look at Stellar Blade, for instance. Look at Liza P, for instance. Their previous game was a mobile game. This was their first console game. Black Myth is another example. Their previous game was a mobile game. So now that they're looking to make games that would be quote unquote deemed as console games, they're seeing people wanting to pick it up. I just think there's ultimately a place for a piece of hardware that sits under your TV that isn't your computer, but getting into those markets is not easy.
It just basically sounds like when the question is, what does Sony need to do to prepare? Your answer is basically just keep doing what they've started to do now.
But they need to go more aggressive. I think
Yeah.
the way we're going, we will ultimately get to a point where maybe things are played everywhere. So Sony don't want that necessarily to happen. They would like to have the closed ecosystem. So I think
Yeah, because it worked for them.
their only hope, so to speak, is to ensure that across the world, PlayStation is a dominant piece of hardware. So even when we get to that point is a PlayStation. Where Microsoft maybe aren't thinking that way and thinking, well, fine, but our games will be there, even if our hardware isn't.
So to put it together then and kind of bring it back, and I'll ask you this, to Nintendo. What does Nintendo need to do besides announce the Switch 2?
I think Nintendo will do I think Nintendo and Sony will follow a similar path. I
You
think
reckon that's the Japanese pathway?
yeah, it's just maybe they're in cahoots. But I think Nintendo will do the same thing where it's like they love making money on a closed ecosystem. That's how they make all their money. In fact, that's the only way Nintendo make money besides merch and stuff, right? So again, if they can tap markets that were previously untapped and become a dominant force, then I think that's the difference, really. It's just Sony and Nintendo want to be dominant forces in markets by name, brand, and hardware, where Microsoft want to be a dominant force by software.
Okay, so in saying that then, do you think that with the Switch 2, for example, like at the moment we've got the PS5, we've got the current gen consoles, they're all selling in China, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do we know that if the Switch is selling in China?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, so Switch 2 day and date also releases in China with backwards compatibility to Switch games, gets in before PlayStation does, really, to like really kick it off. Then PlayStation's up against Nintendo in trying to be that dominant console. Obviously, it depends on what the Switch 2 is looking like. But out of the two of them, Xbox games look like they would most likely go to a PlayStation rather than a Nintendo console.
Well, the Nintendo, and we're kind of going off topic, that's my fault, but Switch 2 is kind of, I think, rumored to be, say, on the power of a PS4 Pro, right? So I think from a market perspective, it would depend on what the games being made for by those developers ultimately aim for. What I mean by that, if they're aiming for high-end PC console, it likely won't run on a Switch 2, right? Like Black Myth Wukong won't run on a Switch 2. Barely runs on a base PS5. So from that point, PlayStation has the advantage there, but Nintendo have their own.
They got Mario Kart 8.
They've got their own, 100 other advantages. So there is that. But I think Switch 2 will ultimately be the proving ground for Xbox as well, right? Like, Halo Master Chief Collection. That would run on a PS4, like level quality, PS4 Pro. Let's put on the Switch 2. Sony will probably do the same thing. Perhaps they will. We already saw Lego Horizon go there. Why not them go... Bloodborne. Running on PS4, that'd run okay on a Switch 2.
They won't even put Bloodborne on PC. Like, why would they?
I know. Maybe that's a bad example.
Why would they put that on a Nintendo Switch 2? Imagine that. That would be the biggest fumble
funny.
of all time. They don't touch Bloodborne for years, and then the first platform they port it to is a Nintendo fucking Switch 2.
Wild. So to bring it all back, no red lines. I think we ultimately learned nothing new. And if you were listening and paying attention to anything they were saying, this was coming and always going to be the way. So I think we can very much comfortably say, guys, get your head out of the sand if you don't believe it's happening. These games are coming across. I think we can go through acquisitions pretty quickly. They kind of touched on the fact that, nothing's in the works currently, but they're always open to acquisitions. People took this as like, expect Sega next year or expect whoever.
Or Ubisoft or something, yeah.
Here's a hint for you guys. If you listen to any of the quarterly earnings calls by any of these manufacturers, they're never going to say we're not open to partnering and acquiring other teams.
They say it every year. Yeah.
They say that every year. But anyway, so we could probably nip that in the bud pretty quickly. I think the other big point, besides maybe the handheld piece, which I did an episode on handhelds that you can check out. I think the big news out of the handheld thing was the fact that it's still years away. People kind of expected it to be out by 2026. That potentially may not be the case. It may look likely that it will be like next generation Series S, right? Where it's launching alongside their next gen console. We could talk about that if you want, but I think the other thing that kind of torn the internet apart was that new ad campaign of this is an Xbox or this is an Xbox, which I think we kind of have maybe kind of addressed in the fact that that's Microsoft's approach. I thought the campaign, the ad was fine. I don't know what your thoughts were on it.
It's exactly what we expected from Xbox anyway. It's what they've been trying to say for the last few years.
Yeah.
Like that, it doesn't matter if you don't have an Xbox console, you can play Xbox games on any platform that you can. Like that's been the whole messaging through Game Pass, through your phone, even through cloud gaming. So the fact that now it's an ad campaign, that it's the same old. Like we're not getting any new messaging here.
I actually feel like a lot of the big hullabaloo that happened this week was like, we knew this.
Yeah,
they've said this before.
That's it. Well, hey, at least it's not as bad as Nintendo's ad. It was a brand new ad for the Switch, and it was just like, oh, you can play it on the train. Nintendo Switch.
We just sold another 20 million units.
That was it. That was literally, it was a minute of just like somebody playing it on the train, somebody looking over a shoulder, and it's Nintendo Switch.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap up. Unless you have any thoughts on hardware in terms of handhelds, but I feel like we've kind of discussed that.
We've covered it. Like it's just another avenue. They're going to see how it works, and also it's going to be one of those unique devices that goes up against the Steam Deck.
Yeah, and it's interesting.
That's really it.
I think the only thing I wanted to say on that, unless you want to talk about what games we're playing, but I'm still playing Metaphor, so it's nothing too exciting. But did you hear the discussion online, I guess, around like the idea of the Xbox handheld having like Steam OS, and that like, basically, given it's going to be rumored to be like a Windows device, that Microsoft might allow Steam to run on it. And then technically PlayStation games would be available on Xbox.
So we've effectively had this conversation before when the Steam Deck was announced, and we were like, well, there are ways that you can, because it was Steam OS. However, you could put a Windows OS on it and have Game Pass on it. So we've already had this discussion. I think having it the other way around, like,
doesn't make sense, right? Like, everyone's talking about it.
It'll have an Xbox OS. It'll have an Xbox OS.
Yeah. And it's because Phil kind of made comments around like, oh, he would like, the stores a bit.
I like everything.
I don't understand what people like.
They like to get outraged over anything.
People they just jump the gun. Like, for me, Microsoft makes so much money inherently just on third-party rips, right? The 30% rip on every Ubisoft game that gets sold. If they move to Steam, every game that gets sold that isn't a Xbox game, Microsoft, under the current arrangement, gets no money. Steam would get a cut.
Selling like Sea of Thieves and stuff. That's all on.
No. So what I'm saying is, say Steam runs on Xbox hardware, right? So the next console or next handheld runs Steam, and I buy Assassin's Creed Black Flag. Steam would get a cut. Ubisoft will get the rest, unless Microsoft negotiate a different deal. But why would they give up that?
Well, that's the same as the Apple Activision thing. And the Fortnite case.
Yeah,
it's the exact same thing.
Yeah. I just don't see a benefit. So you can say PlayStation games run on here as well? Like, I don't think they care that much that they're willing to give in all the 30% rips that they'd get on every game so they can get God of War.
Nobody's going to buy an Xbox handheld to play Steam games, because the Xbox handheld's going to have analog sticks. The Steam Deck has like the touchpads, the trackpads.
And there's also buy a Steam Deck.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think that's
doesn't make sense.
I'm glad we're both in agreement, because I read that online. They're like, see, so the next Xbox handheld will actually play PlayStation games because it runs Steam. I'm like, oh god, it will be Windows based. Sure, maybe you can do a workaround to hack it and get it to run Steam.
Did you know that a Steam Deck could play both Xbox and PlayStation games?
Exactly. So that device already exists. But yeah, let's wrap up here. We've gone on, I think, long enough. Unless there was anything you're playing at the moment you think is worth highlighting. I'm still playing through Metaphor. Just hit the 50-hour mark, so I think I've got maybe another 20-ish, 30 hours left to go. Basically taking over my life. It's the only game I'm playing. It's the only game I want to play. But God, it's long. But it's so good.
I've had a couple of quiet weeks. So I've done a bit of Call of Duty, a bit of Disney Dreamlight Valley.
As you do.
I'm actually, I know that Indiana Jones is coming out in a couple of weeks' time, so I'll have to get myself prepped for that. But I've had Darksiders, the first one, sitting in my Xbox ready to go because I bought it physically. So I might just have to actually sit down and play that.
Fun time. And Darksiders 2, out of the blue, randomly got a PS5 patch or a next-gen patch, save it for Xbox One, that makes it run at 4K 60 frames, like out of the blue. And you know what was super frustrating? You know how I was kind of going through my replay-through of it because I was feeling it? My save didn't carry over. So I upgraded and went through. I'm like, I'm not starting again. I'm fine. I've played this.
Don't you hate that when like you have to do an update and then you have to start again? I'm pretty sure there was a game that did that recently, that you got to the you did the open beta and you were able, or you got early access. Sorry, no, it was Star Wars Outlaws. That was it. So you had early access like a week, and you played up to a certain amount, and then the day one patch came and it wiped the saves.
Yeah, ridiculous. Oh yeah, that's right. And they just said, yeah, just play it again.
And they're just like, oh yeah, just play again. What? No.
Makes no sense. Makes no sense. But yeah, I think we shall wrap up here. It's been a longish episode. We're getting close to the end of the year, so another two more shows left before we wrap up for 2024. Overall, really good year. Some really shitty things happened. A lot of closures and cancellations of projects and things like that. But
we'll get to all that.
Some pretty good games, I would dare say as well. So thank you for watching. I've been your host, Joshua LaRosa, joined by Sean, Holly the Prawn, Harren here on Twitter. You can find us at Joshua LaRosa, at Holly the Prawn, or busy_playing. Remember, we're available on YouTube each and every fortnight, every second Thursday, 9 a.m. Australian Standard Times, and then, of course, on podcast feeds, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Sean, it's been a pleasure, as always. Anything you want to say as we wrap up?
Jeez. Put me on the spot. Yeah, where's the Nintendo Switch 2? We know it's backwards compatible. Just tell us the launch date, tell us the price, tell us how different it is from the first one. So that way I can start saving money to buy it.
I did predict March. I kept saying, well, that's when the first one was announced, and everyone was like, no, it's happening this year. I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. And then I guess the longer we went, it was like, nah, it ain't happening.
I swear to God, if Jeff Keighley comes out on stage, by the way, exclusive, the Nintendo Switch 2, like Nintendo has a message for you, and then we get like a trailer for the launch after the Game of the Year announcement. Look, I'll be a little bit pissed, but I'll also be incredibly excited.
Yeah. And then as soon as I heard backwards compatibility, I'm like, yeah, I'm buying this thing. Anyway.
Yeah.
All right. Let's wrap up. Have a good night, everybody. We'll see you in a fortnight. God bless. Goodbye.